I remember the smell first. Not gunpowder, not glory. Iron in the rain. Our clouds dragged themselves through refinery stacks, then came down rusted. The priests said each drop was the machine spirit weeping oil over our labors. It sounded holy until your lungs started tasting coins. I was a ledgerman, a grain of sand in an imperial hourglass. Dawn meant roll call. Roll call meant a quota. Quota meant I kept my job another day. I balanced numbers the way soldiers balance rifles, by habit, not by love. Men called me bore, not for dullness, but for the way I drilled through old entries and knocked loose errors that had nested there for years. Machines liked me for that. People did not. We lived in a dormitory tower that creaked when the ore lifts coughed. I was on level 188, close enough to the roof to hear the night winds scrape the hab walls, far enough from the ground to forget that anything grew. Evenings were for screens, a red eye in the chapel broadcast, choir vox trembling with the weight of 10,000 throats, the sermon promising the emperor saw us through time. I believed because belief was cheaper than meat. The first thing, the small thing, happened in the ration line. The counter shorted us 2 loaves. The operator's hand went for the baton, and his mouth opened for the lesson, you, people, always. I said, 3rd tray, a loaf is hung on the spindle. Your right-hand weight rune is swapped with the left. He froze like I'd climbed through his visor. There were no windows in that machine. No spindle to see. Only bronze casing that stank of sour grease. He threw the missing loaves down hard enough to bruise my wrists. And he stared, not the way you look at a thief, but the way you watch a pit open under someone else and wait to see if you're standing on the same ground. The second thing wasn't small. The rail lists came late and dirty, numbers smeared in grease-fingered haste. I corrected 2 container codes without thinking and passed the page along. Why switch them? My supervisor asked. It fits, I said, which was exactly nothing. That afternoon, a North Spur train slipped a track. 4 loaders died under a tidal wave of steel. The foreman said the way the weight had stacked saved the rest. I didn't tell him the old order would have killed 20. At lights out, my hands shook so hard I dropped my little prayer book and split the spine. Something that wasn't me whispered, "They'll praise you for seeing, then flay you for seeing." It felt like a mouth close to my ear, then it felt like it had never been there at all. It didn't leave, it changed shape. I began getting up a minute before the shift siren. I stepped off the lift seconds before it jammed between floors. I was halfway across an intersection when a slag cart screamed through on a dead brake, and I was not there. I caught a child's collar as she stepped into a gap panel seconds before it gave, then lay awake that night listening to the mother sob through the wall and thunk a stone against my door. The rock was wrapped in rag, binding an ugly note. You know more than your eyes should, your eyes aren't yours. I prayed. At first, the one-word prayers, sorry, on every stair-step down to the works. Then the long devotions from the chapbook our local confessor pressed into my hands. He came to me, not I to him. He said he'd heard about my foresight, and the emperor had many gifts. He smelled of candle wax and ancient dust. His eyes kept flicking to a damp crack in my wall and counting the stumps of spent tallow on the sill. He said, "We fear our unbelief," when I asked what troubled him. I walked home holding the book tight and realized he feared the same thing I did. Not unbelief, attention. Neighbors began to angle their bodies around me the way a crowd leans from a heat vent. Old Ula from the 5th landing made the sign across her lips when I passed, like she was batting a fly away from her mouth. Children stopped pressing broken toys into my palm. "He'll fix it and it'll come alive," one girl told another. In the ration queue, the flow of bodies bowed out, not because there was less room, but because space had acquired a new slope near me. At work, I tried to pummel the whisper flat under arithmetic. The numbers twitched anyway. Names slid into ledgers that hadn't yet been written. Accidents tallied themselves in margins 2 days early. I tore up a page and burned it in the filtration grate. The smoke that came up smelt like iron rain and old sweat, and something that made my gums ache. "Already filed," the knot voice said, as if there was a library somewhere that shelved futures and someone had learned to read the tags. Joran noticed. Joran had 5 kids and a spine bent like a hook. He lived 3 doors down, smiled with half his mouth, had the other half knocked out by an Arbites riot shield when he was young and angry. He caught me staring at a page too long. "You look like the page is reading you." "I had a dream," I blurted, because it was easier than saying the truth. "You're called for night shift tomorrow. If you can trade to second watch, do it." He did, because he loved his kids and he trusted me more than the machinery that chewed us. He died anyway, 3 days later, crushed under a pallet when a loader's servo seized. I'd saved him once. Death made up the difference. At his vigil, his daughter pushed a fruit peel into my hand and said her father had said I saw things. "I don't," I said. I meant I didn't want to. The peel was sour and bitter, 2 tastes together. Auditors came. Gray carapace, sunburst rosary of stamped purity seals, data slates held like knives. They walked the aisles with eyes like rifle bores. Their lead said, "Errors accumulate where faith is poor," and hummed a few bars of a hymn that made the hair on my forearms rise. He paused behind me. I felt his gaze like a weight across the back of my neck, heavy where a blade would go. My pen didn't quiver. My pulse did. I had the ridiculous sense that if I made the tiniest mistake in my columns, the head would twist off my spine. And yet it wasn't him that terrified me. It was the thing behind him, a shape the size of a cathedral made out of nothing, a silence that had a pressure to it like a storm. I could not see it. I could not hear it. But the whisper in me went dead for a breath, the way a candle flutters when a door opens. When the auditors left, I vomited thin bile and felt very clean for a little while. The manufactorum slept in shifts. The hab never slept. You could feel the city through your soles like a fever patient's skin, hot, shivering, wet, waiting to break. The noble spires were needles of glass you only ever saw reflected in puddles you were not allowed to step in. The underhive chewed end-of-day men and spat them up mealing ghosts. In the shrine halls, false gold leaf flaked from plaster saints and stuck to your lips when you kissed their feet. I did kiss them. There were 100 ways to die and only one way to live with it, and that way ran through altars. The dreams bled into waking. I saw an ocean without light and a tower of bone rising from it. I saw a chair. I saw a king on that chair that never moved, swollen with tubes that had become veins long ago. I saw a black sea try to lift him in a single slow wave, and a star's worth of voices held it down. When I woke, my gums bled. When I slept again, I stood in crowds of people who had no mouths and prayed with their foreheads against iron. My bedside sacramentals multiplied. A nail through the door lintel, a tiny cog hung on red thread, an offcut of stamped parchment with a catechism's 9th line, "We must abhor the witch within us," circled until the ink tore the paper.
The night the power died, the hab moved like a living thing. Without the throb of fans and pumps, we could hear each other. Breaths, sobs, fists on doors. Somewhere below, a woman screamed the word witch until it was just sound. Men pounded down corridors with chair legs and cable links because that was what men had. I folded myself into the space under the table and pressed my teeth into my knuckles and did not move, even when someone hammered my door and yelled my name. When the luminors came back, everything shone too bright for a few seconds, and the dust in the air looked like a map of the stars. In the morning, the whisper didn't come back alone. A new presence crept into the edges of me, a gravity well of nothing. It made my teeth ache in their roots the way a cold wind does, only there was no wind. I went to the window slit and stared at the refinery stacks. The smoke trails looked wrong, too straight. Birds, pale, greasy things, fell out of the sky as if the air had gone suddenly heavy. I knew, like you know the weather by the smell of your coat, that something had entered the city. It wasn't a person. It was the absence of a kind of person. I tried the chapel. The confessor's bench was occupied by a man in an immaculate coat with a scar like a stitched line down his cheek and a rosette pen catching the light like a blade. 2 others flanked him in gray, their palms resting lightly on the butts of holstered pistols. The confessor himself was kneeling in the nave with his forehead on the stones, and he did not get up when I approached. I turned around and walked out as slowly as I could. Walking faster would have made me run. That afternoon, I put on my best shirt, which was merely less frayed than the rest, and joined a pilgrim line for the outer shrine. Pilgrim lines are a sort of weather. They move when they move. The woman in front of me had a baby under her shawl with skin like paper, and the skin twitched when the baby dreamed. The man behind me had a stack of purity papers tied with green ribbon, and he whispered their text under his breath like you might whisper the name of a lover. I thought if I could make it to the outer shrine and lay my palm on the iron rail around the saint's reliquary, the black salt taste in my mouth would pass. The line was cut to pieces in a moment so abrupt it felt like a change in gravity. The front bent left and right around a wedge of black armor. The wedge split into faces. The faces weren't faces. They were veils that turned your gaze back around in your skull. People tried to breathe and could not. A man started laughing and then pitched over like a sack. My knees hammered together without my instruction. The whisper went blind and quiet in the same heartbeat. That was how I knew what they were before I saw the sigils. Sisters of Silence. An Arbites magistrate declared the plaza secured. I understood the words and none of their meaning. Boots pounded the stone, the air filled with the pepper-sharp smell of discharges from shock malls. People who had been singing 30 seconds ago were on their faces. The baby began to cry without sound. The woman's mouth made the shape of a howl and nothing came out. I tried to step back and my legs decided there was no such thing as motion. The world had reset to a zero that included me. "Name," a voice said, close and professional. A hand under my jaw lifted my head. The man who held me had no insignia and a rosette at his throat. His eyes were the gray of old paper. "Speak," he said. I could not. My own breath seemed distant. Sound was a thing other people had. My skull was a sealed vessel. Behind him, a figure in sable plate turned slightly, and even the memory of sound dulled. The nothing they carried wasn't cold, and it wasn't heat. It was subtraction. It took things away. Echoes, thoughts, stray wants. The itch of the whisper, gone. In its place, an outline where it had been, like the pale square a painting leaves when you lift it from a wall. The man with the scar scooped my papers off the ground with 2 fingers. "Ledger hand," he said, to no one I could see. "Level 188. No strikes, no documented heresy." He smelled like machine oil and bitter herbs. "Unregistered phenomena observed by multiple witnesses. Reports of prediction, anomalous correctives, avoidance of mechanical incidents." He tilted his head. It wasn't a question. It was a summary that included my life more accurately than my own prayers had. I wanted to protest everything at once, that I was faithful, that I did not want whatever I had, that I hadn't asked to know where loaves caught on spindles or where carts would fail their brakes. The protest fell apart before it reached my throat as if the words had encountered a field and lost their cohesion. "Do you love the Emperor?" he asked. I nodded. The nod felt like someone else borrowing my neck. "Good," he said mildly. "So do we." He took my arm, not roughly, not gently, the kind of grip that turns you into a lever and moves you without effort. The sister turned away and sound came back as if someone had poured it from a jug, a crash from a market stall overturning, the buzzing whine of a debt vox, a child wailing like a torn sheet. That was all behind me now. We did not go to a precinct. We did not go anywhere I knew. Down a service stair that smelled of old water and the dead skin of the city, past the door veined with lumen filaments that pulsed when the sister went by, along a corridor whose walls sweated chill that no heat spike could dry. I tried to count steps and could not keep the count in my head. Numbers slid at the edges of my vision and would not stay still. In a room with no corners that I could see, Corners make shadows, and this chamber hated shadows. A second rosette glinted. Men and women stood the way statues stand when they're pretending to be people, too still, too present. A steel chair waited for me. It wasn't bolted down, and did not need to be. They took my name the old way, spoken, and the new way, printed. They asked exactly what I had done and exactly what I had not done and exactly what I had thought about doing when I didn't do it. I told them the truth because I could not have shaped a lie with my mouth in that room if it would buy me all the bread in the hive. When the sister drew closer, answers thinned to simple nouns. When she stepped back, I could recall verbs. "Sign," the scarred man said at last, and pushed a slate across the table. The document was brief. It said what I was. It said what would happen next. It said I was property, but it used a word more pious than property. I tried to read the last line, and the letters refused to be letters for a long breath, like a flock of birds refusing to be corralled. When they settled, they said, "To be remanded for transport." "Where?" I asked, and heard my voice come out like it had been stored in another man and returned used. He did not answer me. He looked at the sister. She did not speak. She never would. The air around her didn't carry words, but even without a voice, the shape of our future was there between them, a line drawn across a map I hadn't known I was standing on. They hooded me then, not rough, not gentle. The fabric smelled of salt and ash. I felt the world contract to the drum in my chest. Somewhere above the dormitories, above the manufactoria, above the iron rain, something vast had taken a breath. I did not know its name. I did not need to. The whisper that had been my curse had gone quiet, and in the quiet I could hear the city like a wounded animal listening to its hunter's step. The step kept coming.
They took me from the tower in the hood, and when they pulled the cloth away, I was no longer in the city I had known. I was in a pen. Not a prison, not yet, but something older, cruder. Fences of steel mesh, lamps burning too bright, and a smell that no soap had ever beaten. Sweat gone sour, fear turned thick, and somewhere the thin acid tang of flare. We were hundreds in that yard, maybe thousands, a sea of faces, all with the same mark on them, though no ink had written it, the look of people who had been chosen against their will. They were children, more than I wanted to see. Some cried without stopping, small bodies shaking until sleep stole them for an hour. Others sat too still, staring at nothing, lips moving like they were learning words no one else could hear. The old were there too, stooped men and women, dragged from shrines and fields. One kept scratching her palm until blood shone through her fingers. Another whispered jokes until a guard clubbed him silent. Soldiers sat among us, men in fatigues with the wide eyes of deserters, though their crime had been different. They had woken one morning with fire behind their eyes, and now they were livestock like the rest. The guards were not kind. They were not cruel either. They were mechanical, Arbites with shock mauls, sisters of silence in their armor like walking walls. A sister would pass, and the world inside your head would simply switch off. The whispers, the half-dreams, the crawling itch of thought, all gone in an instant, and you were left hollow, bare and shaking, with a hunger you didn't know you had. When she left, the voices rushed back like floodwater. Some people screamed when the tide returned. Some prayed. Some tore at their own faces to try to hold the silence longer. They herded us into transports, rust-red macro haulers, usually meant for ore. Now they were for us. Men pressed against women, children crushed between knees, old bones bent until they snapped. The heat was a furnace, and the air stank of piss and despair. We rode like that for hours, sometimes days, Doors would slam shut, and we would be alone in darkness, rolling across the Manufactorum roads toward a horizon we would never choose. People tried to run. Always. A boy, no older than 12, wriggled through a gap in the mesh, sprinted into the dark. He almost made 10 steps before a bolt round caught him. He ceased to exist. No warning, no speech, just red rain that smelled like iron rusting in water. His mother clawed at the fence until her hands were ribbons. She didn't stop screaming until they put her down too. We learned the lesson, but the lesson did not matter. The desperate still tried because desperation is the last resource of the weak. Each attempt ended the same. One less mouth, one more stain on the road. Nights were the worst. In the dark of the haulers, minds unraveled. I heard laughter that wasn't laughter, saw sparks of green flame crawl along the walls with no source. One man's eyes burst in his head as he shrieked the name of something none of us understood. The sisters dragged him out. When the door slammed again, there was nothing left but the smell of cooked blood. And yet in that nightmare, the strangest thing was how people still clung to each other. I watched a mother cup her hands around her child's ears to shield him from screams. I saw 2 old men trade the last crumbs of bread in their pockets so that one could last another day. I felt hands grip mine in the dark when the fear was a physical weight. Little pieces of humanity, fragile and bright, trying to outshine the shadow we were all falling into. The convoy rolled on. Cities blurred past, spires seen from a distance, glowing faintly through smog, cathedrals like broken teeth, ruins where the warp had already kissed the stone and left it weeping pus. At every stop, more were loaded. The haulers swelled until we were nothing but flesh pressed on flesh, sweat on sweat, and the sound of sobbing was constant as breath. When we reached the spaceport, it was as if the world ended. The ground shook with engines that had never been meant for dirt. Ships crouched like predatory beasts under the night sky. Black hulls veined with sigils that glowed faintly gold. I had thought myself prepared, but I had not understood the scale. And then I saw it. The Black Ship. It was not a vessel. It was a cathedral carved into a void-born coffin. Its flanks were jagged with bastions, its prow a tower bristling with sensor arrays that looked like the spines of some dead leviathan. Its color was not black the way night is black. It was black the way an absence is black, a hollow where even memory refuses to linger. Around it, the air seemed to bend inward, as though light itself was a prisoner. People wailed when they saw it. Some fell to their knees, some clawed at their faces, some tried to throw themselves into the dirt to vanish before being taken aboard. The guards moved among them, silent and efficient. Batons cracked skulls, shock staves spat white arcs, gun butts hammered ribs. Order was restored in blood and broken bones. But the fear could not be ordered away. It lived in us now. It lived in me. Because in that moment, I understood. The haulers, the fences, the pens, all of it had been kindness, a cruel kindness, to prepare us for the true cage. As the ramp lowered and the air grew colder, I caught the first stench of the Black Ship. Incense, thick with copper, the tang of old fire, and under it something raw, like a wound that had never healed. The sisters lined the way up. They did not move. They did not speak. Their silence was louder than any engine. I walked forward because I was pushed, but in truth, there was no choice. The void swallowed voices. The world I had known, with its iron rain and coughing towers, was already gone. What waited ahead was not life, not death, but something deeper and darker. And above us all, the Black Ship waited, patient,
as the grave.
They marched us through a throat of iron, carved with prayers. Hexagrammatic sigils were cut into every seam. Black wax pressed into the grooves and scabbed there like dried blood. The floor plates hummed, not like a machine that wants to work, but like a beast grinding its teeth. The hold was a cathedral inverted, pillars of cagework tier on tier, each cell a rusted rib with a door that did not swing so much as decide. Wards burned faintly on every bar. The light was wrong, too clean, too steady, so that all the dirt of us showed. Someone had painted a line on the deck with ash and oil, and a stenciled line of text ran along the bulkhead at eye level. Abhor the witch within. The last word had been re-stenciled so many times that the letters were raised. They branded us, not with flame. Brands are for cattle and pride, but with a cold stamp that left a number under the skin, a twinge whenever a sister passed. They locked manacles on each of us with little black stones set into the wire. The stones made my thoughts feel like bad teeth. When I touched them, my fingers came away with a metal taste in the nails. Routine established itself like mold. Dawn wasn't dawn. It was a shift in the lumen from white to a yellow that pretended warmth. A horn blew and doors snicked open to the first rung. We took our pans to a slot where gray paste thumped out in glistening bricks. It tasted of salt and coins and something that kept you alive. Water came from a pipe that never ran clean. Twice a day, the buckets went sliding along rails. You had to be quick or the bucket went on without you. And what came next was a flood on the deck and the batons. Prayer was piped in on a schedule that ignored our throats. The sermon vox spoke of service, of the emperor's endless hunger for our love, of how love is proved not by words, but by heat and pressure. Men cried when the voice told them they were chosen. Women laughed a little and then pressed their fists to their mouths, ashamed of the laugh. Some kissed the ward-scarred bars. Some cursed so softly they forgot the shape of their own mouths. When a sister walked the aisle, all of that fell off us like old scabs. The silence she carried was not peace. It was subtraction. I watched a man scrape the inside of his arm with a tin spoon until he found blood, as if he could draw the hush back out of him and drink it. We were 1,000 little worlds crammed together. There was the guardsman who still flinched towards orders when the horn sounded. Keston, from some regiment whose badge he had cut out of his sleeve and hidden under his tongue until they made him spit it into his palm. There was Mara, a seamstress with a mouth that found laughter the way a vine finds light. She'd stitched inner seams for noble coats she'd never see worn. And once, she said, she'd mended the hem on a bishop's vestment with thread blessed by 4 different priests. There was Reed, a boy whose age ended where fear began, with a white streak in his hair like a brush of frost. There was the old catechist we called Pike, though his real name was a tumble of syllables. He kept all the questions he'd ever been asked in his eyes, and all the answers too. We shared our breaths. We guarded our crumbs. We discovered that if you wet the paste and spread it thin on the hot section of the deck plate seam, it crisped a little, and you could pretend to remember bread. Sins shrank to scale, stealing an extra mouthful, sliding a hand under the pan to catch a second drip, whispering a prayer with your eyes open to see who listened. When someone shivered too hard, we hunched around them and tried to put a shape of warmth back into their body. When the horn blew for sleep, sleep did not come.
The first night, a girl burned. It went like this. She sat up too fast and said a name I did not catch, and every lumen in the hold lent her their light. It arced along her arms and found her eyes and softened there. Then it went green, the way copper does when it remembers what it used to be. The bars around her glowed. The air stank like temple incense forced through a soldier's lungs. For 2 heartbeats, she looked like a saint from a fresco, edge-lit, lifted, beautiful in a way that hurt. Then the sister was there, 2 strides and a hand on the manacle, and something inside the girl kinked. The green folded, the light went hard, the smell changed to cooked blood. When we could see again, there was ash in the pan at her feet, and a shape like a person's outline shadowing the wall. Reed vomited until there was nothing to bring up, not even bile. "They saved her," Pike said afterwards, to nobody, and to us all. He meant it. I wanted to strike him for it, and then I wanted to beg him to say it again. They came every day and took some of us. They read numbers out of a slate, and the numbers stood up inside our skins and made us walk. No one told us where the taken went. We filled in the answers ourselves. To the pits, to the engines, to the screaming room where they pull the wire straight through your head. Keston said once, too calmly to be sane, maybe to the chapel. Mara said hush and touched his wrist, and the way he looked at her hand, you would have thought she'd given him wine. Sometimes the taken came back. Sometimes parts of them did. A woman returned without the little finger of her right hand and the little finger of her left eye, if an eye can be said to have such a thing. There was a notch in her seeing that made her gaze catch and stutter. A boy came back sleepwalking. He walked the aisle and did not trip on the rungs, though his feet dragged. And when the horn blew, he lay down under the bucket rails and let the buckets bang along his back like he was a rung himself. They let him. I did not ask why. Some mercies were beyond me. Other nights, the ship talked to us. I don't mean the intercom. I mean the hull. It flexed. It told us about pressure and cold and a place where direction didn't exist. I lay on the deck and pressed my ear to the metal and heard it say no again and again, the way an animal says it in its bones when a trap closes. Once, just once, it said yes. I do not know what that meant. When I lifted my head, my ear was bent, and my skin bore the shape of a rivet. A sister passed with a censer one shift. The smoke was a sweet that my tongue ached. Her null field drank our voices, but not our looks. For a second, she glanced into our tier. Her face was a perfect mask, not beautiful, not ugly, perfect like a polished blade or a blank page. Reed took one step toward her. He wanted, what? Silence, maybe? The rest of us grabbed him, Mara first, and held him fast. The sister did not pause. That, somehow, made it worse, as if we had not even earned her notice.
When she was gone, the hold tore itself with sound. Men howled. Someone laughed until he wept. Keston slammed his forehead against a bar 3 times, just to feel something that was his own.
They punished us collectively when one of us made the field spike. One man in a lower tier began reciting lists of numbers fast and flat until his mouth foamed. A guard smacked his teeth out with a baton. For a day and a night, all rations to that tier were cut. We listened to them go hungry and pretended we could not. The second day, a woman there began to sing. She had a good voice. The sisters walked the aisle, and the song went on without a sound. We could see her throat working, see the breath in her chest, but we couldn't hear the notes. I learned then that there are songs you sing for yourself, not for ears. Mara stole a bent pin from a guard's cuff with a touch light as the thought of mercy. "For stitches," she said. She mended the cuff of my sleeve with thread teased out of her own hem. The neatness of the repair brought me to near tears. The pin became a relic. She hid it under her tongue when they searched, and I did not understand how she did not bleed. Keston cleaned a square of deck with his sleeve each shift, a ritual, until the sleeve grew polished black and shone. Pike told Reed parables that always ended wrong, and yet left a taste of rightness. I counted heartbeats between horn and lost track and began again. We were making little walls against what was coming. It came. Anyway, the warning wasn't a horn. It was the taste in the air, metal and salt and a sweetness like rotted fruit. The lights didn't dim. They tinted, a shade toward bruised purple. The humming underfoot rose in pitch until it lived in our bones. The script on the bars seemed to swell, as if the words were breathing. Somewhere far forward, a klaxon cut loose with a sound like a saw opening a cathedral. "Translation," Keston supposed, too loudly. No one answered. The ship wasn't moving. Ships always move, but falling, sideways through something that didn't have a direction. My stomach tried to pour out of my throat. The buckets ripped free of their rails and skittered like beetles. The manacles bit. Reed's eyes went wide and wider until the whites were moons. The first scream had more than one person in it. I saw it before I believed it. The shadow where the lumen could not go reached up the cage and gripped the bars back. The metal sweated. The ward letters crawled. Someone in the next tier over began to speak my name, in my voice, and then in my mother's. She died when I was 9, and I had forgotten the exact shape of her goodbye until I heard it come out of a stranger's throat. Mara sucked in her breath like a blade had kissed it. Pike began a prayer, and the prayer stuttered as if his tongue had found static. Bolters roared. The sound was a physical object that shoved us against the mesh. Heat kissed my face. Purge flame blossoming, blue core, orange tongues. The sisters moved through fire like it was smoke, and through smoke like it was water. Where they went, the stuttering in my head ceased. Where they were not, things made of bad angles gathered. I saw hands at the edge of seeing, too many joints. I saw a grin without a face, hung in the air like a lantern. I shut my eyes, and the grin followed me inside. A man 2 cells down broke his manacles. He did not break them with strength. He broke them with not caring that they were there, which, I learned, is a kind of power.
The stones in the wire cracked and spat sparks. He raised his hands, and the bars bulged outward, hex-ward lines stretching like gum. "I can feel it," he said, and the voice that came out of him had 10 mouths layered in it.
Keston hit him with his pan through the bars, uselessly. It made a soft, domestic sound. The man turned his head like an insect turns its head, without moving any of the parts people use, and saw too much of Keston. A pressure wrapped the guardsman and lifted him like a child picking up a doll by the ankle. I could hear his bones count themselves. Then a sister stepped into the aisle, and all want burned away from the world, and the man who had been breaking things convulsed and went very, very still. The bars snapped back with a whip crack that cut lines into my cheek. Keston fell, not broken, just empty of something he had almost lost. Flame rolled. The smell was indescribable unless you have ever smelt the moment when meat goes from raw to never edible. The klaxons bellowed and sobbed. The hull sang. The hold shook like a beast hit in the spine. The ward script bled wax. Pike kept praying, his voice a torn thread, until blood strung his lips. Reed crawled under the bench and put his hands over his ears and screamed into his palms. I lay on my side with my face pressed to the grate and counted the bolts holding it down. 22, 23, 20. The number broke in my mouth when the light went out and came back wrong. Mara pulled Reed out from under the bench when Flame licked there. Her hair caught and she beat it out with her palm and didn't make a sound. Her mouth was busy saying, "Here," to a child who had no words left. She looked up once and saw me looking and smiled like a woman who had found bread. A thing like a thread of glass slid through the mesh and cut Pike's throat in a line neat as a seam. He tried to finish his prayer with air and couldn't. He folded down very slowly, like a man lies to sleep when he is afraid of waking. Blood moved across the deck in straight lines and took the shape of letters I didn't want to read. The letters lifted as if they were trying to stand. The sisters pushed back. Blanks are not absence. They are shape. Theirs filled the hold. The wrongness recoiled. The bolters stopped. The flame died by degrees. The humming sank its teeth deeper and steadied. The purple tint drained out of the lumen and left everything its old, honest filth. The klaxon changed key and became merely a horn again. Smoke stood in layers you could stack your hand through. Ash drifted, glittering where the light caught it, and made halos around heads that didn't deserve them. The manacles ached inside my bones, and then eased. The wards on the bars looked smaller, as if tired. I could hear the ship breathing, long and slow, like a giant asleep and not happy in its sleep. They counted us. They always counted us after blood. A woman with a slate and a face like a slammed door walked the aisle.
She wrote down the numbers that did not answer. She did not look at the bodies those numbers had been. Men came with hooks. Hooks clanged against bars and sang, a high, sweet note that made my teeth rasp. Mara touched the burn on her hand and said nothing. Keston stared at nothing with a ferocity that would have been faith in a different room. Reed slept with his eyes open and his hands tucked under his chin, like a prayer you make for yourself when the others are used up. Pike lay where he had fallen. I wanted to close his eyes. I didn't. He had earned watching. An announcement shivered through the hold then, syllables flattened by the speakers into shapes without edges. Translation complete. Maintain containment protocols. Gellerfield sustained. Reassessment Schedule 9. The words meant we were in the place people speak about and no one understands. The place where your thoughts can bite you. The sisters turned and walked away, censer smoke making little flags of scent as they went. The door to our tier decided again and closed. I lay there and watched ash fall and knew two things. The ship had hundreds of nights like this ahead of it, and so did we. The whisper inside me had hidden when the silence came and crept back when the sisters left, sharper now, as if the storm had honed it. It told me nothing clean, only this, that the hold had not been full when we came aboard and would be emptier when we left, and that the emptiness would have our shapes. We had not begun to burn, not properly. That would come on the road through the dark.
Time died. That was the first thing. Not in a sudden way, not as a candle snuffed, but like breath leaving lungs too tired to draw again. The horn still sounded for waking and for sleep, but the spaces between had no weight anymore. We would eat, and then it would be time to eat again, though no hunger had touched us. We would sleep and wake and find the lights in the same place, the same shadows, as if no moment had passed at all. Some men counted their heartbeats to anchor themselves, until their hearts betrayed them by stuttering or racing, and the numbers went mad. Some marked scratches on the bars, until the scratches crawled like worms across the iron and arranged themselves into new patterns. The warp was not outside the ship. It was inside us. The hull breathed it into our bones with every shiver. Dreams invaded the waking hours. Faces pressed against the bars that were not flesh, mouths opening on prayers in languages older than any temple. One woman began to laugh softly, steadily, without pause. She laughed until her lips split and blood salted her teeth, and still she laughed. When at last her throat tore, the silence she left was worse. Children were the first to break. Reed curled under the bench and muttered numbers that had no sequence. 749, sky, sky again, mother, mother, mother. His voice thinned until it sounded like two voices running in parallel. Mara stroked his hair until her hands shook too hard to continue. Another boy, name lost, simply vanished. His manacles still chained a pair of wrists, but the rest of him was gone, as though peeled away like wax. The guards did not comfort. They punished. When a wave of madness swept a tier, the sisters would advance in their silence, and the warp would recoil. But their presence was no gift. To stand near one of them was to be hollowed, scraped clean of thought, until you felt nothing but the shape of your own absence. Some inmates begged to stay near them, kneeling like dogs, just for the blessed void they carried. The sisters ignored them. To them, we were not people. We were inventory. I learned then what selection meant. Each week, if weeks still existed, they came with the slate. Numbers were called. Those who rose did not return. Once, Pike's number was read, but Pike lay cold already, throat cut by a shard of glass that had no edge. The guard checked the number, shrugged, and dragged the body out anyway. Flesh was flesh, alive or not. Whispers multiplied. The one that had lived in me since the manufacturum was no longer alone. It argued with others, sometimes in words I knew, sometimes in words that made my gums ache to hear. They promised power, promised freedom, promised warmth, promised an end to silence. I pressed my forehead to the deck, reciting catechisms, and felt only the iron answer back.
Some inmates embraced the voices. Keston tried to keep his soldiers' discipline, but I saw the cracks. He saluted shadows. He barked orders to no one. When Mara reached for him once, he snapped his teeth at her like an animal. Later, I saw him whispering into his pan, as if the paste there could hear. The next day, his eyes were black, clear through, like the void itself had filled them. The sisters came. He resisted. The fight lasted seconds. They left nothing but scorched iron where he had stood. Others prayed harder. The old catechist who had replaced Pike pressed bloody knuckles against the bars, chanting until his skin split. "The Emperor protects," he gasped. "The Emperor protects." When the warp storm rose again, his words twisted, syllables folding backward, until what left his mouth was not prayer, but mockery of prayer. He sobbed when he realized, begged forgiveness, and smashed his head into the bars until his skull opened. The ship itself sickened. The walls dripped rust that was not rust, but clotted blood. The lights shifted colors without reason. Green for a moment, then blue, then the ugly red of butchered meat. Sometimes they all went out, and we could still see. Shapes moved where no lumen shone. Once, the entire hold filled with the smell of roses. We wept for the memory of beauty. Then the roses rotted into ash and bile, and the weeping turned to retching. It was then the storm caught us. The translation engines howled, a keening so deep it cracked teeth. The hull juddered like an animal in seizure. The floor rolled under us, though we were in void, not sea. Gravity failed, then slammed back twice as hard. Men vomited blood. Children floated, limbs flailing, until the sisters' nullfields dragged them down like anchors. The klaxons blared, but their tones bent, warped, until they were voices chanting. I covered my ears,
but the chanting was inside. The warp pressed in, not like an enemy breaching walls, but like a tide rising around a drowning man. Faces swam in the air, leering, promising. Hands reached through the mesh, talons brushing skin without touch. One man burst like an overripe fruit, insides spraying into zero gravity, then spinning like red beads in air. Mara shielded Reed's eyes, but Reed was already laughing, the laugh of the woman whose throat had torn days before. I prayed. I prayed until my tongue bled. For the first time, something answered. Not the Emperor, not anything holy. It was warm, gentle. It told me I could be free if I only let go. If I let the flood carry me, I would never drown. I would become the tide. My hands shook, my breath hitched. For a heartbeat, I wanted it. For a heartbeat, I wanted nothing more. Then the sisters advanced. Silence fell like a blade. The voices shrieked, recoiled, vanished into cracks. The storm did not end, but it lessened. The ship groaned. The wards flared red and held. One by one, the horrors dimmed, until we were left with only ourselves again. And ourselves were horror enough. Afterward, bodies were dragged away by the hooks. Reed lay in Mara's lap, eyes staring at nothing, lips moving on numbers that made no sense. Keston was gone. Pike was gone. The catechist was gone. Mara whispered lullabies to no one, her voice cracked raw. I pressed my palms together until the bones creaked, and begged the Emperor not to hear me, because if he heard, he might see, and if he saw, he would know what I had thought in the storm. We had not left the warp. We had only survived one night of it. There would be others, many others, and the voices would not give up. They had found me. After the storm, the ship learned a new rhythm. Count, cull, calm. The horn sounded not for waking and sleeping, but for subtraction. Doors decided open. A slate appeared. Numbers were read in a voice without shape. The taken rose like puppets and walked the aisle. Sometimes they looked over their shoulders. Sometimes they did not. The buckets rattled past, lighter. Rumor became a food we chewed when the paste would not go down. The rumors agreed on their bones and argued the flesh. Some swore the taken were bound into a choir that sang the Gellerfield back into key. Others said they were poured into engines the way oil is, burned clean and holy. I kept my mouth shut and my ears open, and tried to believe nothing at all. The believing or the not believing made no difference. The numbers kept being read. Men in red came then, hooded with braids of cable for hair, sensor wheels ticking slowly at their waists. Their voices had edges. They tasted the air as they moved, tongues of brass clicking,
and their eyes were lenses that irised in and out until you felt catalogued. They were not priests of any shrine I knew. Their prayers sounded like math turned into knives. They took Reed's measure, and he flinched like a skinned thing under frost. The lensman didn't touch him. He just held a rod near the boy's chest, and it clicked in a way that made my knees ache. Amplitude, he said to the slate holder. Instability high. Retain for application. The words fell like bolts into a bin. Mara grabbed Reed's hand and put herself between him and the lens, as if flesh could block a decision. The red man's head tilted a fraction, cataloging the gesture. His hands did not move. That shift, our tier was marched, not all, never all, to a place I had not been. The hold opened into a corridor whose walls dripped with cold. The air smelled clean, and in the black ship, clean was an accusation. Hexagrammatic filigree climbed the bulkheads in gold brass, pinned at each junction with black wax. We went down 3 flights by my count, and along a bridge that spanned a pit of machines. The pit hummed like prayer sung through teeth. The bridge brought us to a hall. It looked like a chapel turned inside out. No icons, no saints, just chairs in rows facing a lattice of gold wire that curved in a dome, its ribs studded with crystals the size of knuckles. The chairs wore restraints like jewelry, padded and precise, made with a care that made me lonelier than cruelty would have. Red-robed techs moved among them, testing buckles, peering at needles. Sisters stood like punctuation in the margins, their silence pressing the room flat. "Sit," said a woman with a voice that had never once been allowed to be kind. We sat. Panicked men sit. Proud men sit. I sat. Restraints closed with clicks that sounded like decisions being made elsewhere. I stared at the lattice. Its gold was not bright. It had the color old coins have when they have passed through too many hands. A red-robed adept stepped before the lattice and intoned a string of binaric bursts. It wasn't language the way the catechism was language. It was a program spoken at a god. Runes along the ribs lit one by one, the light crawling, then running. The lattice hummed. The hum found my molars. "Application begins," the woman said. She did not look at us when she said it. She looked at the lattice the way a surgeon looks at a wound he might yet close. They called numbers. A chair down the row leaned back like a dentist's rig. A child, small, gender lost to fear, writhed against the restraints. A sister put her palm to the child's brow, and all writhing ceased. A red man spun a wheel. The lattice gathered light the way a lung gathers air. It pulled, and the child arched as if the shape of their body had misremembered itself. The crystals brightened. Somewhere deep in the ship, a second hum answered the first like a lover's breath. When it ended, the child sagged. Breath misted once, twice, did not miss a third time. The red man logged a number. The sister removed the body with the same precision with which a mechanic removes a part that is not broken enough to jam a machine. The lattice's light trickled down its ribs, a thin rain pattering into conduits that led through the floor, out of sight, into the ship's bones.
Not all died. Some came back, changed. A woman's hair whitened all at once, and her eyes saw past the room into something that was not there. A man's hands smoked, and the skin sloughed from them like gloves.
He cradled his palms against his chest and wept quietly, grateful to be allowed to keep the weeping. When the red robes were satisfied, they unbuckled us and led us back across the bridge. No speech, no moral. The lesson was the light still scudding into the ship's veins long after we left, as if lives took time to digest. Back in the hold, we tried to fit what we had seen into older shapes. Mass, someone whispered, not blaspheming so much as groping for a word his mouth had permission to form. A sacrament. Pike would have answered him better than I could. Pike was gone. The new catechist's mouth worked and found no homily. Mara shook, not in fear. Fear is too simple, but an outrage so large it looked like fever. Reed slept with his eyes open again, prey reflex. The next day, the slate came early. It came angry. The storm had not ended. It had only paused to laugh. The ship quivered in its skin. Runes along the bars flickered. Somewhere, metal screamed in a tone that made my bowels loosen. The lensmen hurried. The sisters moved faster than stillness should. Amplitude rising, the red voice said. Field stress, unacceptable. We learned that day that there are numbers you can't negotiate with. They read Reed's number. I didn't think before my mouth moved. No, I said. Word a stupid thin board braced against a wave. Mara's hand crushed mine and let go, and grabbed Reed. The sister turned her helm just enough to let us see the seam where visor met cheek. It told us nothing. He is a child, Mara said, not pleading, announcing a fact that should have weight in a world that had forgotten weight. Take me. It wasn't brave. It was the only equation that added. Take me instead. The lensman cocked his head like a bird. Amplitude, he said again. Patient. He might have been identifying the gauge of a bolt. Instability. Retain for application. Reed had stopped shaking. His face had gone very calm. He looked impossibly small in the manacles, like a child trying on a giant's cuffs. For a second, I thought I could see the seam of the universe where decisions are cut and sewn. If I tore there, perhaps everything would spill out wrong, and the wrong might be better. The whisper inside me bloomed, soft and earnest. Do it, it asked. We will help. Loose the bars, pour the field, drown the ship, and be a tide. I could have. I don't know if that's true. It felt true. I saw where the ward script thinned, where a smear of old wax had left a gap in a letter, where the field haloed. I saw the path my hands would take, the moment my mind would stop being mine and become a key turned in a lock whose owner would never see it open. I tasted metal. I smelled ash that had not yet been born. I'll go, I said to the sister. Take me and let him stay. Two things happened then, both cruel. The sister did not turn her helm. She did not acknowledge that I had made a shape with my body at all. And Reed smiled, small and perfect, the smile of a boy who has been hungry every day of his life and is given once a sweet that is only for him. He touched Mara's wrist. It's all right, he said, and the numbers in his mouth had gone. I'm not afraid. He lied. He was a child. He lied to be kind.
They took him. We went with 3 tiers, 20 souls. A file poured across the bridge into the chapel of gold wire. The ship bucked, the lattice shone. The red men sang their knife math. They strapped Reed in as if the care of straps could rewrite what care meant. The sister's gloved palm touched his forehead. His eyes closed the way a door closes when a house is cold. The wheel turned. It was not dramatic. The light climbed the lattice calmly, a dawn through filigree. It found the crystals and they bloomed. The conduits brightened, rivering that light away into the ship where the field lives. The hum smoothed. The wards along the walls sighed like women who have put down burdens they've carried too long. The horn changed key. Somewhere deep in the spine, something settled back into its groove and stayed there. Reed exhaled once. His lips tried to find a number. They could not. Then he was not a person, but an equation that had resolved to 0. The sister lifted her hand. Her gauntlet smoked a little. The red man logged a value. The chair tipped forward and gave Reed back to gravity. Mara did not scream. She made a sound for which I have no letter, thin and invisible, and put her face in her hands. I reached for her shoulder, and she did not feel my hand. I wanted to be a wall for her, a roof, a fist. I was a ledger man counting losses in a place that had invented new digits for grief. We returned to the hold. The door decided shut. No one spoke to Mara. Not because we did not care, but because words would have been small, rude things crowding a room that already barely held the 2 of us and Reed's absence. The buckets came. We fed like beasts, because beasts live. The horn blew for sleep. The lights pretended to dim. The next subtraction came at dawn that wasn't. Not a selection, a revolt. It wasn't planned the way plans are. It was planned the way storms are. Pressure gathered, cracks spread, something gave. The tier below us had a man named Varen who had been a sergeant and still remembered what lines are for. He had slipped 2 screws from a grate with a thumbnail and made them into points with patience and blood. He had a way of seeing sisters when they were most not to be seen. He had a voice that could move a group of tired men 3 steps left in the time it takes a baton to travel 3 steps right. When the slate appeared, Varen spat, and a dozen men did not stand. The lensman frowned. Annoyance was as near to feeling as he came, and raised a hand. The sisters stepped. The dozen stepped too, but forward. Screws meet eyes, pans meet joints, bodies meet bars. The field hiccuped. For 1 heartbeat, the locks believed in open. They believed enough. A door decided wrong. A man rolled through the gap and made more gap with shoulders and hate. The aisle filled. The ship lurched. Voices rose. Human, warp, mine, others, until all sound was a single pressure that wanted only more. Varen bent to seize a shock maul, and the man next to him caught the bolt for him and vanished backwards without limbs. Down, I shouted, and did not know I would until breath made the word. Mara went flat, I went over her. Bolts shredded the air into heat and smelt. A sister walked into the aisle, and her silence blew the riot like dust. It didn't end, it lost cohesion. That is how order returns. The techs didn't run. They never run. They began chanting the knife math at speed, snapping rune switches closed with calm.
and the lights of the lattice down the hall stuttered into a brighter hum. I felt it like a nail driven into the beam of my head. The riot wanted to become a breach. The breach wanted to become a door. The door wanted to become a mouth. The lattice made the mouth close. Verin met a sister in the narrow way, and did not slow. He had been a sergeant. He understood that some orders are only useful if obeyed until you die. He put his screws into the gaps of the gauntlet and made blood under the black. She stepped half a step back, the only time I saw one of them move for us rather than through us. The other sister's bolt found Verin's temple. He did not fall so much as sit, as if tired of standing. The men with him broke like foam on rock. After, hooks came. Numbers were read. Rations were cut. The hold smelled of victory the way a wound smells of iron. Wrong, brief, confusing. We had taken nothing. We had filled the ship with more of ourselves, and it had eaten that too. Mara washed her hands in a trickle of brown water, and they stayed red in the creases no matter how she rubbed. She lay down with her back to me, and I pressed my open palm between her shoulders like a seal. We slept, because there was no other thing to do that did not end in screaming. Selection accelerated. The ship still shook. The lattice wanted light. The red men wanted values. The sisters wanted quiet. The slate wanted answers. And still, we were human, in ugly, stubborn ways. Men shared crumbs, as if crumbs had grown bigger in the night. A woman braided the hair of a stranger, tight and neat, the way mothers do when a day must be faced with a tidy head. Someone told a joke so bad it stepped over into holy for one heartbeat. When the horn blew, we started, and laughed at ourselves starting, because if you do not laugh at your own jump, you begin to jump at your laugh.
I would like to say I made a choice then that made me a better man. I did not. I chose to live. I chose to save what I could save, which was often my breath, and sometimes Mara's. I stopped listening to the voices when I could, and when I could not, I bargained with them like I had bargained with Foreman. You will have me later. Not now. Not while she breathes. The ship took what it needed. It took Reed. It took Verin. It took the man who had counted with me the bolts on the grate and found a different number. It took my belief that selection was a word that belonged to merchants and gave me the truth. We were fuel. Not metaphor, not sermon. Fuel. You stoke it when the field flickers. You meter it when the storm rises. You burn it clean, and you log the value. That night, the one after the revolt, call it a night because the light pretended it, something else changed. Deep under the iron, under the halls and the holds, under the lattice, I felt a pulse. I had felt it before, once, long ago, when I was a boy falling asleep at the foot of a shrine, my cheek on cool stone. It was the breath of a light no eye can see directly without going blind in a deeper way than eyes can manage. Bright and dim. Bright and dim. The ship turned its face toward that pulse like a plant toward a sun. Even in the warp, even in the wrong, there was a direction. Terra, someone whispered. The word did not save us. It gave the culling a destination. The slate came. The numbers answered. We learned to keep our backs straight when we were read, because we had learned there were men who took numbers and wrote them neat. They would take mine soon enough. The whisper said so with no triumph at all. It told me, very gently, that I would not be allowed the choice I thought I had avoided. The lattice would take me, or the dark would, or the throne. The hold sighed, a sound like a long, low note. Somewhere, a man began to sing under his breath the hymn that promises protection. It was a small sound. It filled the cage. Mara took my hand, and her palm was a map of burns and threads. I did not say Reed's name. Names have weight, and weight sinks in a tide. We slept in shifts and did not. The door decided. The horn pretended. The ship ate. The light pulsed far and far away, steady as a heartbeat in a world where time had died.
They called my number. The sound of it was smaller than I had imagined. A syllable, a click of tongue and teeth, a note in a ledger written before I was born. It rang in my bones like a bell tolling itself. For days, weeks, if time had meaning, I had listened to names, watched them rise and vanish. I had wondered when my turn would come. Now it had. Mara's eyes met mine. She had no tears left. She did not try to hold me. That was her mercy. She only reached out, touched my wrist with fingers that trembled like broken wires, and whispered, "I'll remember." The lie was kind. No one remembers. Memory rots like everything else. The sister gestured. I stood. My legs carried me because that was what legs do when commanded. We filed into the corridor again, down past the dripping walls, across the bridge above the machine pit that hummed like a throat chewing glass, into the lattice hall. It was brighter this time. The ribs of gold sang with restrained hunger. The crystals pulsed, already awake. The red-robed adepts moved with impatience, snapping switches, chanting Binharik in sharp stabs of sound. The ship was thirsty. I was the cup. They buckled me in. The restraints were cold, almost gentle. I felt them close, like the arms of something pretending to embrace. A sister pressed her palm to my brow. The world shrank to silence. No voices, no whispers, no prayers. Only myself, naked as a wound. For the first time in years, I was truly alone.
Then the wheel turned. The lattice drank. It began with a pull behind the eyes, as if thought itself were being unspooled. My memories rushed out first. Faces of neighbors, scraps of childhood laughter, the taste of iron rain. Then fear, then rage, then the soft ache of wanting. Each stripped away, leaving nothing but the raw scream of a soul dragged bare. My body convulsed, but the straps held me. My mouth opened, but the silence of the sister smothered even that. Light cascaded along the golden ribs, brighter, higher, until it filled the dome. The crystals flared white. The conduits blazed, carrying me away into the ship's veins. My name dissolved. My thoughts bent backward and snapped. I felt myself scatter into sparks, each spark pressed into some endless, hungry machine. There was no mercy, no reward, no judgment, only consumption. The last thing I felt was the ship exhale, steadier, stronger, carried by me, as it had been carried by Reed, by Pike, by countless others whose ashes lined the void. The Geller field pulsed whole, the warp recoiled, the Imperium endured. I did not. And in that final subtraction, I understood what every sermon had never dared to say. The Emperor protects, but only the throne he sits upon.